Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. And today's video is again on the events of Karbala, but more specifically about one personality who I think is probably as important as Imam Hussain, and some might argue even more important, and that is Bibi Zainab, Imam Hussein's sister. We will talk about her role in Karbala and also the events that followed the Ashura. And in the previous video, we talked about what would have happened if Imam Hussain had given pledge of allegiance and had endorsed Yazid. But in today, we will talk about what would have happened if Bibi Zainab did not do what she did. What would have happened to the memory of Karbala and also the trajectory of Islam as we know it. We will also talk about what are the lessons that we learn from Bibi Zainab in today's life. But before we talk about Bibi Zainab and her role in Karbala, let's briefly talk about who was she. She was born in the Hijra 5, or after Hijra 5, so 5 years after Hijra. She was the younger sister of Imam Hussain and Imam Hassan. And her name was Zainab, which is a combination of Zain and Ab. Zain means the adornment of, means father. So she was the adornment of her father. Imam Ali was her father. And as you all know, she was the daughter of Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima, and the granddaughter of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In the previous video, we talked about the events of Karbala and the tragedy of Karbala, including the shahadat, or the martyrdom of Ali Akbar. So now, fast forward that Imam Hussain was also killed. This is Ashura, the 10th of Muharram. Now the army of Yazid is celebrating like, like they have won a Super Bowl or something. And they were, they started looting. They started burning the tents, knowing there are children and women inside. So anyone who even has a shred of doubt that this battle was between two factions of Muslims in Karbala, just take another look and take a deeper look at the events of Karbala and also the events following Karbala. So they made the women and children captive. Imam Zain al-Abidin is the fourth Imam. He is the only surviving adult from the tragedy of Karbala. Why? Because he was very sick. He was so sick that he was bedridden. So when the tents were on fire and all the children were running around and many of the children were lost, he was not able to get up on his own. So he might have actually gotten burned inside the tents. Hazrat Zainab put Imam Zain al-Abidin on her back and took him out of the burning tent. So if she could only be remembered for saving Imamat, that is one thing that, that alone is actually good, but then her contributions to the legacy of Karbala only grew after the Ashura. She became the de facto leader of the family and friends and the companions of Imam Hussain, or whatever was left of them, the children and the women. And they were led, and their hands were tied in ropes and chains, so much so that there were actually several people, adults and children, were chained together. So you will have an adult and a child, basically where they were tied in the same chain, so the children's feet were not even touching the ground because they were raised up by that chain. And they were paraded through the streets of Kufa and then later on in Syria, on the way to the palace of Yazid. And they were paraded as the trophy, as if you were having a Super Bowl parade. Only this time, the family of Prophet Muhammad was being paraded in an attempt to humiliate the family of Prophet Muhammad. So Bibi Zainab, even though the enemies of Islam had intended to humiliate them by parading them, but Bibi Zainab, remember this event in Karbala happened in a desert faraway land. This is away from Kufa, Medina, Makkah, and Karbala was really a bare land. Nobody actually could, there were no one who was living there. So this happened and nobody knew about it. So when they were paraded through the streets of Kufa and other cities on the way to Damascus, where the palace of Yazid was, people lined up to, it was almost like a tamasha. People were just looking around, hey, look, there's someone who stood up against the king, and they were actually killed, and this is their family. And but Bibi Zainab stood up, and at each stop, she gave speeches. She told everyone who they were and why they were killed and who were the enemies. She drew the distinction between the enemies of Islam and the protectors of Islam. And this continued even when she arrived at the palace of Yazid. And then her conversations with Yazid is something that all of us should actually go and look at and read. Some of the sermons that she gave are known for her eloquence and her courage. Remember, this is a woman back 1300, 1400 years ago, and she's standing up as a prisoner, chained, talking to a ruthless tyrant leader. And she stood up and reminded who Yazid was. She literally put Yazid in his proper place, in front of the packed palace where he had gathered a lot of audience, only once again to humiliate the family of Prophet Muhammad and the family of Imam Hussain. So, and then also they were living in dungeons. The dungeons were really like 4 or 5 feet tall, so much so that you could not stand up straight. And they lived there for a number of months, so much so that when they actually got out, their backs were bent because they were used to walking bent forward. Bibi Sakina died in that dungeon during the captivity. When she had died, and after giving all of these speeches, the tide started to turn against, there was a lot of uproar. People started to realize what has happened. So it wasn't like what Yazid was painting. And this was the beginning of the fake news, because the fake news that Yazid had spread and his soldiers had spread that there was mutiny of a small band of people, and Yazid's army, the so-called Islamic army, had gone and killed them, and these are the captives. She was the one who then drew the distinction between the right and wrong. She told them who was Imam Hussain. She reminded everyone what the hadiths were about Imam Hussain, and that Prophet Muhammad said that whoever loves Hussain loves me, whoever fights him fights me. A lot of people had forgotten that. And so the tide started to turn, and so much so that Yazid was forced to release them. So Yazid released them, and then Bibi Zainab and then the rest of Imam Hussein's family, including Imam Zain al-Abidin, were free to go back to Medina. So remember, Bibi Zainab also lost 2 sons, On and Muhammad, in Karbala. And when they were martyred, Bibi Zainab did not shed a single tear. She did not shed a single tear when their beheaded heads were paraded through the streets of Kufa and on the way to Syria. She did not shed a tear when she was in the palace of Yazid giving him lectures and sermons. And then on the way back, same thing happened. They will gather people gather around them, and then she started to tell what happened. Until when she arrived in Medina, back to her home. And until she went to the bedroom of her 2 sons, On and Muhammad. That's when she broke down and cried, because then she started to miss them. So the question is, what happened if Bibi Zainab did not do what she did? The tragedy of Karbala could have easily gone to waste. People would not have known whatever happened in that far desert land known as Karbala. And Imam Hussein's sacrifice could have gone to waste, quite frankly. It was Bibi Zainab who revealed the facts. She dispelled all the fake news. She stood up against tyrant. She is a role model for not only all the women, she is a role model for all the men. In many ways, she is the founder of Majalis. So we do the Majlis every Muharram to commemorate Karbala. She was really the founder. She is the one who started to gather these people. So these impromptu speeches that she gave really were the Majalis. And then she went toward the tragedy of Karbala with them. And then that trend continued later on. The Majalis that we do now are the Sunnah of Bibi Zainab. So how do we pay tribute to Imam Hussain and Bibi Zainab and their sacrifice? We talked about how we can best do that. Same thing with Bibi Zainab. So the least we can do is follow her examples. Have the love in our hearts. Build a relationship. The question we have to ask ourselves is, do we have relationship with Imam Hussain and Bibi Zainab and his family? When we hear the name of Imam Hussain, when we hear the name of Bibi Zainab, Ali Asghar, Ali Akbar, Sakina, Abbas, what happens to our hearts? When we see water on Ashura, do we remember their thirst? When we remember these names, do our eyes get teary? To feel the ache in our heart? It can only happen if we have the love in our heart for them. I understand there are many ways to express mourning and our sadness, but one of the key to feeling someone's sadness is actually to love and have empathy. We cannot have the empathy unless we love them, we feel closeness. They give so much for us. The least we can do is to remember their sacrifice and have the love in our heart for them. And it cannot happen if we just give cursory or lip service to their memories. So if we just only remember them for a few minutes every year, the only reason why we have the memory of Karbala like 1380 years later and it feels so strong as if it happened yesterday is only because we do this year in and year out, and we do this with passion. Passion is the key. We cannot be very esoteric about the events of Karbala. Yeah, we want to learn from it, but we cannot just do this in an academic manner. Otherwise, we are going to miss the boat. It's all about our love and connection to Ahl Bayt and the martyrs and the prisoners of Karbala. And remember, once again, why they give their sacrifice is actually to show the right path to the path of Allah. And this is the message, take-home message is, if we remember Bibi Zainab and we remember Imam Hussain and his family, but if we don't remember Allah, then we are missing the boat. So the purpose of our life on this earth, planet Earth, is to actually be servant of Allah. And we are servant of Allah no matter what we do. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that I could do to make it? If we don't have the relationship, that's bad, but just what can we do to build that relationship? And if we already have the relationship, how do we make that relationship stronger? Our relationship to God, our relationship to Imam Hussain, Bibi Zainab, and of course their grandfather, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And if we do this by remembering them once a year for a few minutes, that's not enough. That's not enough. In the end, and I'll offer this dua and prayer again. May Allah be our protector and our guide. May Allah give us the wisdom and show us the light to choose the path of Prophet Muhammad and path of Imam Hussain and Bibi Zainab. Ameen.